So it sounds like you're talking about institutional racism, Dr. Ryan. How can travellers and their allies call this out?
There's many definitions. I don't want to get into the definitions of institutional racism versus racial bias. There's so many different levels. But there's no question that in Ireland there's been institutional issues over many years against many different groups. If you happen to be an unmarried mother in Ireland, or you happen to be in other groups, or you happen to be the child of a poor family sent to Borstal, there have been many cases where institutional bias and institutional damage has been done by the way we deal with any community that we have. There's no, I believe that most people in Ireland, even amongst the authorities, aren't institutional racists in themselves, but the institutions and their behavior behave in a racist way, because it's not associated with tolerance, it's not associated with inclusion, and there are deep biases in the way those systems work. There are deep presumptions around what people are, who they are, what they are, and how they operate. So in that sense, there is institutional racism, but it's, needs to be addressed by not calling everyone a racist. The issue is systems themselves behave in racist ways. They're driven by racial bias. They're driven by ethnic bias. They're driven by class bias. They're driven by what people have learned their whole lives and the presumptions they make about other communities. And that then becomes very insidious, because it's very hard to change, because no one sees themselves then as a racist. No one sees themselves as having a problem. The problem is with all the other people. And until we all recognize that we collectively have a problem, we all have a problem. And if you call that institution racism, you can label it that way. But the reality is we have a problem as a society. There are people who are marginalized, excluded, and are suffering mentally for that. They're suffering physically for that. You can argue the cause, you can argue the fault, you can argue all of that. But it has to be recognized there are people who have lived outside our system, on the margins of our system, for decades and for generations. And we continue to do that. If you call that institutional racism, then that's what it is. But it will only change if everybody recognizes that and recognizes they have a responsibility and a part in the solution. And it's not someone else's job, and it's not just the government's job, and it's not that person's job, and it's not the education system's job. It's everybody's job. And I think the othering of people and then the othering of the solutions is what's causing the problem. It's somebody else's issue all the time. It's not mine. And I do think we have to change. We need to all accept our part in the blame for a problem that's affecting our society. It's affecting who gets houses, it's affecting who gets healthcare, it's affecting educational attainment, it's affecting mental health. It's having that effect. That can't be argued. If that's happening because institutions are behaving systematically to make that worse, then that's a real problem. But that's not the only problem. Everybody's the problem, and therefore everybody must be the solution. Because we end up in these simplistic arguments around whose fault is it. It's everybody's fault, all of us. And we get to fix it because we get to elect the politicians. We are the institutions. The citizens are the institutions. And if the citizens decide to change the way we deal with this issue, then it shall be changed.